Good evening, dear listeners and watchers of the International Film Festival for the Human Rights. Good evening and thank you for participating, sharing and reacting to this panel that we will have today about the popular uprisings that occurred in the Arab world, but not only there, in 2019. Thank you as well to the RTS, which is hosting this panel. It has been called the second wave of the Arab Spring, and it started in Sudan at the end of 2018. But then it resumed in Algeria, and then in Lebanon, and then in Iraq. That's why we are very happy to host today Ala Salah, who is a young student and an activist, and who became the symbol of the Sudanese revolution, known as the famous Kandaka of the uprising. We are happy to host as well Perla Joe Maalouli, who is a filmmaker, an artist, and an activist from Lebanon. And we are happy to host as well Abdul-ahad, who is a journalist, an Iraqi journalist working for The Guardian and based in Istanbul. But before we start, I have to stress one point. The Arab world was not the only region where you had uprisings in 2019. Apart from the women's marches and from the protests against climate change, 50 countries in the world witnessed uprisings, popular marches in 2019. So it's a global movement that is happening from Hong Kong to Haiti. We will talk with our guests as well about this global movement and how do they share the same values, the same goals, and the same methods. First, we will speak about this second wave of the Arab Spring. Reis, as a journalist and as an Iraqi, would you consider it is the continuation of what started in 2011, what occurred in Lebanon last year, and is still occurring those days?
No, Christophe, I will first disagree with you about the term, the second wave of the Arab Spring. I mean, I think the term Arab Spring may have described what happened in 2011, 2012. But what's happening now in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Sudan, of course, it's been inspiring, it's been connected, but also I think it's part of a more global phenomenon. So I see what's happening in Iraq is more connected to Chile, is what's happening in other places. Yes, there is a common thread that connects all these things: despotism, sectarianism, nepotism, all these corrupt regimes that have been ruling the Arab world. You know, but then you can compare Sudan with Iraq. In theory, we have a democracy. In theory, we have a parliament that's been elected by the people.
At least you have a vote.
We have the vote. So, but then we have a common thing, and the common thing that's spread around the world, which is a ruling elite that is so corrupt, kleptocratic regimes, so entrenched in corruption, militarism, militias. There is no rule of law. So when I speak about Iraq, when the people went into the streets, of course they were inspired by Sudan. Of course they were inspired by Lebanon. Of course they've been this dream. But then it's a very local reasons. And I think this is why we have seen more success in these demonstrations in the region now than we've seen first stage, because that connection that connected Syria to Lebanon to Egypt, the fact of the Muslim Brotherhood, the military interference in these uprisings didn't happen this time. And this is why I think there's more chances of success, at least in Iraq and we've seen in Sudan, than the first stage of these uprisings.
We will. This was a very rich and full of ideas intervention, and we will enter each of them. First, I wanted to know from Ala Salah, if you, what happened in Sudan? Did you take lessons from what happened in other countries like Egypt, for example? Of course, the regimes were not the same. You have an Islamic regime in Sudan and more secular one in Egypt, but military regimes in the two cases. What did the Sudanese protesters learn from the Egyptian experience that happened in 2011, 12, and 13, and ended in a very bitter way by the return of the military to power and even strengthened military regime.
Sudan in particular witnessed a revolution in 2013. We are benefiting from our own experience in 2013. We were able to know what were the mistakes we made and make use of these lessons.
For example?
For example, in 2013, there wasn't any organization for the demonstrations. There were demonstrations without organization, and there was oppression. And therefore, this non-organization led to the brutal oppression, which was greater than we could deal with. What was different in 2019 is that the demonstrations were organized according to professional programming, and every Thursday there was a main convoy. The convoy or the procession was started in the middle of Khartoum. It was weaker at the beginning. We couldn't guarantee the safety of the region, and there was oppression. After that, in January, these convoys or processions were transformed from centralized to a very timely manner according to certain requests. Each convoy procession had a case or claims to be made. And these processions were organized. We would move according to a plan. So what was different was the organization. Also, our unity between us, how we're able to be in contact between each other in various ways. Then we were able to maintain, we found alternative means to remain in contact, either writing on walls in the neighborhoods or writing down stories and distributing them. And therefore, we were able to develop our means of work, and we witnessed the glorious December Revolution.
But maybe one of the biggest difference is that the demonstrators continued to put a pressure on the regime after the fall of the dictator, which was Omar al-Bashir, and the revolutionaries understood very well the difference between the ruler and the regime. The regime can continue, the ruler can go, but the regime is continuing.
Yes, when we had our slogans, we didn't just mention names such as Omar al-Bashir or Ibn Urf or other symbols of the regime. We wanted the oppressive regime to fall because it was weighing heavily on the breast of the Sudanese people. They created wars in Darfur. They committed all kinds of crimes, whether rape or waging wars. These were the undertakings of the previous regime, and our problem was with the regime as a whole, not with symbols of the regime, and we wanted the whole regime to fall. And on the 11th of April, we brought down Mr. Omar al-Bashir, and we wanted the whole regime to fall down. And on the 11th of April, Ibn Urf was brought down, and our problem, as I said, was with the regime. Our claims were quite clear, is to ensure the fall of the regime. A month ago, a law was promulgated to put an end to the Muslim Brotherhood's activities, the National Congress, and therefore we managed to obtain our first claims and demands.
Thank you very much. Perla Joe, yeah, if there is a country where everybody would have said, oh no, no revolution in Lebanon. It's too complicated. It's too sectarian. It's too selfish. and maybe there is some freedom. It's the only democracy in the Middle East, so why shall people rise? What is your answer to that? How did you manage to bring people together?
We have the illusion of democracy in Lebanon. People have been fighting this just like Sudan. I think you just said 30 years. We've been fighting for this ever since the civil war that ended in 1990. I was born in 1992, so basically there's part of the memory of the bloody memory that the elder generation has made that we don't have it in our memory. So today there are 3 generations that came afterwards, and with the freedom of the truth today through the social media and through the access of the truth, giving the fact that our national TVs are all infiltrated with all political parties, so people are now being capable of being more aware of what's happening around them. People are trying to, like, I'm here today in Switzerland and I see a country, I see solutions, and I see hope to learn and maybe try to implement something back in Lebanon, because people were capable to actually do it. The revolution has started in 2015. There was a revolution. In 2005 there was. So people, I've never joined before, but this time I couldn't not to. The streets were calling for everybody. We were at first more than 1 million. And such a tiny country, more than 1 million can bring down a system. But our Moldi, and they're just holding on so tight to their chairs, and they're taking it very personal. They're acting blind and deaf with us until today, even though it's time for them to leave. It's time for a new system to rise. It's time for the new generation to take over. It's time for honest and people who have enough conscience to think about their lands and about humanity to take over. It's time for the constitution to be applicable, because we have a good constitution, but it's not applicable. Everything's working through confessionalism today. Everything's working through nepotism, everything. And we're sick of that because it's not working anymore. They have proved their failure today.
To the point that we are now in kind of a bank run where the poorest are taking the biggest burden of this financial crisis.
We are an upper middle class nation, according to some studies, but yet 1/3 of our population is extremely poor. Why? Because we're now in more than $100 billion debt in Lebanon. We have 3 different numbers of the dollar exchange rate. You cannot take your money from the bank right now, everything you've worked for. We are in one of the biggest economical crises that ever happened. A lot of people have been talking about this. It's been years. I've never heard of it before, but people went down through candidacy before and they spoke about this, and yet they're not in the parliament today. Why? There's something made for solution not to take place in this country due to many regional and international and local factors.
Because if we want to compare countries like Lebanon and Iraq, for example, both of them are sharing a sectarian system, but both of them are sharing as well relatively free elections in compared to Sudan or Egypt or no, because it seems that the new thing is that people are asking for citizenship more than democracy. They understand that democracy, the vote, the freedom to vote, is not enough to ensure a real democracy. It seems this is the biggest difference between 2011 and today.
If I say, if anything has been achieved in Iraq since the beginning of this uprising in October last year up until today, is the end of sectarianism. So Iraq, yes, democracy, but it's a sectarian system, نظام طائفي, where the Shia will vote for the Shia, the Sunnis will vote for the Sunnis, and the Kurds will vote for the Kurds. And we've been through a civil war. It's a bloody civil war. I mean, I've seen that civil war, many other people seen it. What happened in October if we speak in a sectarian term, you see the Shia poor of Baghdad and southern cities going out demonstrating against the ruling Shia political parties and the ruling Shia militias. If I kind of opened like a tiny...
Please.
By the end of ISIS in 2018, 2017, the defeat of ISIS, it was the utter defeat of, let's say, the winning of one side of the country over the rest of it. So the Shia militias, the Hashd al-Shabi, the paramilitaries that were instrumental in the fight against ISIS came back and became the ruling class. So those young kids who are demonstrating in the streets, many of them were fighting in the war. Many of them were fighting with the militias. But when the war ended, like in Lebanon after the end of the civil war, people realized that the militia commanders have become entrenched in power, in corruption, in business, while the Shia kids who were fighting in the south of Iraq are still the poor. And there is no electricity to the Shia and to the Sunnis. It's a whole corrupt system.
While Iraq is a very rich country.
Very rich country. We have $40 billion in. So this is why when 2 years, so end of sectarianism, when you see a young generation of Iraqi Shia kids, they're not demanding reform, Islah in the name of Shia. They are demanding in the name of Iraq. So I sometimes walk in the squares, and I'm an old man and I've seen wars. I have tears in my eyes because I see people just coming together. It was an amazing... So this is the first thing we've achieved in the demonstration in Iraq. A new Iraqi identity, a new Iraqi... The most important thing I would say since 2003 till today is these demonstrations. The other thing that has been achieved is kind of like pushing all these powers, Sunni Shia Kurds, into a corner and accusing them by the people, like you've been corrupt, you have done nothing to help the nation. 17 years of $40-50 billion a year, and the living conditions in Iraq are on par with one of the poorest nations in the world. That is the second thing. So, and it's still, the struggle still continues because, of course, Iraq is part of this dynamics, which includes Iran, which includes the United States. I mean, the killing of Soleimani in Iraq almost shifted the dynamic, the conversation of these demonstrations. So the struggle continues, but things have been achieved. And this is why this time, I'm an optimist for the first time since 2003 for the changes that have been happening in the region.
Perla, you were saying it's almost Lebanon.
Yeah, because we are in a sectarian system as well, and we lack electricity, but yet we have triple of your debt. Okay, I lost it.
So how can we go from a system where you have the right to vote to a real democracy where the citizen is in the middle of the preoccupation of the old system? I mean, where the citizen is the most valued person and not the ruler.
Quickly, I would say that, one of the things, one of the things that I would say been achieved in Iraq, or kind of the moderate demands of the Iraqis, were for a new election law, in which one person votes for one member of the parliament, not as a list in which the Shias will go into one list and the Sunnis in one list. So this has been the most important demand of the uprising, which is one man, one vote.
Okay. And what's your point of view, Ala?
Sorry. I also lost the idea. Can you repeat, please?
What is your view on how to achieve a real democracy where vote is not a fake comedy or a pretext, but a real choice from the citizen? This is why I think the Sudanese Democrats or revolutionaries asked for a 3 years transition and not immediate elections, because they need time to rebuild a political scene and a civil society. Is it?
Yes, exactly. The experience of elections in Sudan under the previous regime was as follows. Elections were held, yet they were not transparent and they were not fair. And all the people have agreed that the regime of Omar al-Bashir and his party could not control the country moreover. And then they said that we wanted Omar al-Bashir to rule for another 4 years. In 2018, Omar al-Bashir wanted to reform the constitution and amend it so that he would stay indefinitely up till the end. And this was the turning point for us. Because there have been crises, we have been patient. The economic situation, education, in all those fields we have been able to be patient. But when came up this idea that the same scenario will come back in 2020, and then the National Congress Party will come back, and Omar Bashir will come back, and this is what we have rejected. The right to vote is a right, but how can we guarantee that I will have my voice? How can I guarantee that this voice is reached, is heard, that is not manipulated? We have a lot of problems around that are going around elections. This is the problem.
Yes, Perla.
So basically, whenever we go down to the streets and we shout, our politicians go and say, it's the people who got us to the power. And I stood and told them, like, it's your corruption that got you to the power, because we've seen a lot of vote being thrown in the bins. We've seen people who slept as MPs and woke up as not. We've seen their law is made and is sued in a way that suits them so well, in a way that it's so hard to break in. And at the same time, they have a successful system, I have to say. Like, they make people poor and they deprive them from social justice in a way that you're like, yes, thank you for giving me this piece of bread. Now I can go down and kneel for you. But it's now, today some people in Lebanon are asking for sooner to have the elections, but other people are a bit scared because they're not maybe ready, because we are in an economical crisis, and given the fact that when elections run, it's like Christmas time. Money's coming in, every poor person feels like, oh my God, I have extra money coming in this month. I used to feel that as a child. I remember, like, we used to buy services through the vote, and buy services, also you give the vote, and they know you because they have the numbers. You have that much Orthodox in this area, so they see how many people voted. And like, we have to, the day we can provide social justice to our society, this is the day that we can no longer buy the votes. But until now, they're still buying it, and they're managing to get us into the corruption of the election and of democracy.
Because this kind of crisis of the vote system, it seems to me that the West is going through it as well. I mean, it's not to such a level, but the voting system is not the only or best way to. There is a crisis in representation. This is, for example, the biggest lesson from the Gilets jaunes in France, that voting is not the only way to ensure people a fair representation. The weak need. Whoever the weak are, it can be the poorest ones, it can be the women, for example. They need some rights that are not ensured only by elections, because elections is only about a share of power, and then people are not obliged to enact a policy that protects the people who voted for them. Or that empowers the people. So for me, it seems that this big point of the crisis of representation is one of the big, it's a world crisis and not only an Arab one, as you said.
I would again have to disagree with you.
Okay.
I mean, yes, there is a problem in representation democracy everywhere in the world, but I think there is such a big gap between what's happening, for example, in Iraq and Lebanon, Sudan, Algeria, and other places, and what's happening in the West. It could be your existential issue. It could be a representation issue. But in Iraq, for example, although we have democracy, although we have constitution, when the kids went into the streets demonstrating, which is a right guaranteed under the constitution, 700 have been killed up until today.
700.
28,000 injured, and thousands are in jails and missing. This is in a democracy that was established by the Americans and everyone else. So this is huge. We are fighting against entrenched powers that are military, that has, I mean, Omar al-Bashir and the party has been looting Sudan for decades. Will they let go easily? Of course not. Same thing in Iraq. Will the militias, will the prime ministers previously from 2003 till today, will they relinquish power? Will they give up their weapons? I mean, one of the things that the kids in the street are calling for, that السلاح للدولة, that the weapons belong to the army, to the state. Which militia is willing to give up its weapons? This is our struggle. It's a huge, huge struggle, and we're just starting.
Both of your countries, Allah and you as well, in Lebanon, you have, I think, militias, armed militias, which are outside the state. Hezbollah, in your case?
في القوات المسلحة عفواً الحركات المسلحة
We have armed forces that have rebelled against the former regime. This is on one hand, but on the other hand, we have the Janjaweed forces.
So my question is, what to do with regimes who are ready to kill tens, hundreds, or even thousands of protesters? What kind of strategy could be can be enacted against those regimes? Violence or still Selmiya, the peaceful?
We tried violence, but we're not as good as they are. We're not as strong as they are, and they've been playing this dirty game for so long. We've already had a lot of Lebanese who are injured, a lot of Lebanese who lost their eyes because they shoot rubber bullets on top of the head. They don't even have the decency to shoot on the leg. We have a lot of people who lost their memory because they hit them on the head. Women, men, they don't care. Kids, it doesn't matter. I want to add just before you were talking about getting rights for poor and women, also men, I have to say, because we have a father who suicided a while ago in front of his kids' school because he couldn't pay tuition. This is also like everyone today is in on this boat in this crisis. We need to speak about humanity, I think, and it's really hard to you consider them to be militias. For them, if you go and speak, because I sat with these people, I remember the first 2-3 days I went down to the revolution, I was attacking these militias. People tried to hit me. Instead of me fighting back with violence, I sat and had coffee with them. And I'm like, why did you get irritated when I said this about Hezbollah? These people, for them, they've lived a war that we haven't lived. So basically, when Israel was coming in and the military wasn't capable of actually protecting these homes or these lands, these people had to get weapons from Iran and to actually protect their lands. So for them, they have a different sort of history. For them, we don't even study the same history. We don't even, we don't listen to each other. This is the first time through this revolution that actually Lebanese from different regions are understanding and listening the problems that are happening today. We had militias too, like even in the Civil War, we were the militias. My father, if you want to consider, like they fought for the Christian side of this. This was also back then crucial. So they all have blood on their hands. The problem is today that I don't even want to put them in the equation of the problem. I want to swipe them off.
Yeah, but they will not disappear like that. So how can you, for example, Sudan knew a big repression on the 3rd of June, last 3rd of June, with hundreds of people killed, raped, or even thrown into the Nile, disappeared. How did the Sudanese activists manage to overcome that moment and get to this transition done?
احنا كنا واثقين تماما
We were
من
quite
الحاجات اللي كان
aware
بيعملها النظام السابق
of what the regime has been perpetrated against our citizens, the rape, the killing, the arrests. We have been peaceful for long against the regime, so our weapon was stronger than their own. It was to be peaceful. As for the massacre that took place at the General Command place, it was the biggest tragedy that we had in Sudan. They wanted to perpetrate this massacre so that we go back to them with violence. Still, we have responded with peace, and we remained peaceful despite of all what happened, the rape, the burning, the killing, even enforced disappearance. After 8 months, there are people who have disappeared and are missing. And all those things, I think, they did them so that we go and take the weapons. But we have seen different experiences, like how will things will turn out if we take weapons. We thought that we will not be able to achieve peace.
Maybe.
Blood against blood will lead to more blood. Always. This is what we figured also in Lebanon, especially that I'm not a soldier. I'm not willing maybe to die alone because it won't change anything. This is a long process that we're going to have patience and persistence to actually get into an election and maybe another election and keep accountability on the ministries and stay on the street. It's not going to happen, or it's going to be bloodshed, or we're going to have to get weapons from outside and fight them, which is not... we are not people who are living on the street and coming, and we are really people who have work and have studied and who are who have a bit of like social awareness and want things to go more humanely in your country and for you as a citizen to get your right. But I remember one time when they used tear gas on us and it was expired, which is like, and they throw water on you first for you to get even more hurt, and you're like, who are you fighting? When they went as a government to get the trust, we were thousands telling them there's no trust. And they went in like rats with thugs protecting them and hitting everyone left and right. And when I saw this, I'm like, oh my God, as human beings, we have really went so far with violence. And what can break them is peacefulness, because this is the game they don't know how to play. This is the game that will touch every heart, because not everyone can understand numbers and facts today, but people can understand pain. People can understand love. And this is what's making us keep on going. And this is why you're optimistic, I think, today.
And I was one of the people who was betting. Iraq is a very violent country. The demonstrators were young men mostly, but again, women later came into the demonstration. But in the beginning, there was so much violence, and they were killing people with the tear gas, military-grade canisters, snipers, and everything. I was one of the people saying, the Iraqis would last for 1 month, silmiyas, like peaceful, but by the second month, there will be violence. And I was proven wrong. I was proven wrong because there was a realization, there was a realization that the moment people carry weapons, this is what they want. The militia's been fighting, and they want people to turn into violence. And I think part of why Syria descended into a civil war is the militarization of the opposition.
This is the big lesson of Syria.
The big lesson, and suddenly you have an opposition that is as, committing similar crimes and kind of ISIS and whatnot. So the realization that we shall not carry weapons. I mean, some of the massacres happened in Nasiriyah. Nasiriyah is a town in the south of Iraq where if people fight over 2 cats, like 7 people would die because it's a very violent and very armed tribal society. There, up until today, no one is carrying a weapon. And that is the biggest, I would say, victory of this stage of the uprising of the Arab world.
And on top of that, a peaceful revolution brings in elders, students, kids. The second you start shedding blood, or you start hitting, or you start shooting, you lost all of this. We've seen it in Lebanon. The day that violence started, we've lost three-quarters of the people on the street. Then we had to re-maintain it and do another social movement instead of having stones being thrown everywhere and people dying and being hurt in vain, because we have to be clever on how to deal with these militias at this point and these systems.
You were adding
الحاصل في السودان إنه من أول يوم
What happened in Sudan, that since day one, our movement was peaceful. And in June, the massacre took place. And I would like to say that we decided to take the right track. In revolution, we are defining our goals, which was first to topple the regime, And the massacre of the General Command took place on the day where the constitutional declaration was supposed to be signed and the transitional government was supposed to be established and set up. So things would have been different. We would have been more secure, more safe, and we would be chanting slogans of democracy and justice so that in 3 years we will be able to reach safety in Sudan with a country that is ready to hold free and fair elections. So this is why they have perpetrated the massacre. They wanted us to go off the track and they wanted us to take weapons so that we respond to them with violence. But the people were more aware of that and they thought that we shall not go in that direction. Sometimes some protesters were infiltrated by people who wanted to incite others by violence. When something of that happened, we knew that these people are not from us, they just want us to go in a different direction. So we knew that those people were with the former regime. This is why we would tell about them so that they will be arrested. Those people wanted to push us for violence, towards violence, but we didn't want that.
Now, I want to jump to the issue of religion. Would you say that the movement that occurred in your different countries show that the people want religion to become to stay as a private matter and not a public one in the public life or politics?
If I may answer, I mean...
Yes,
sorry.
Yeah, please.
One of the most important things, political Islam in its Shia form, let's say, has been ruling Iraq from 2003 till today. And one of the biggest things that happened in Iraq, two things at the same time. So again, the crowd is not a secular atheist crowd. It is a religious crowd. But that crowd, which is religious, is saying no to the religious parties to continue their interference in Iraq. They are Shia. They still go to Karbala and Najaf, but they don't want to have ruler who says, I'm ruling you by the name of religion. And then, so one of the biggest chant by the name of religion, the thieves have stolen us. And that is a very important thing, is the bankruptcy of political Islam after 17 years, 18 years in this region, whether it's Shia, whether it's Sunni, whether it's Muslim Brotherhood, something else.
Sunni as well, because you cannot say that the experience of power of Muslim brothers in power was such a success in Sudan or in Egypt even.
And one other thing which is very important to Iraq is this demonstration in Iraq could have been wiped out day two, just like happened in Iran. The thing that maintained, and this is an oxymoron. So the clergy in Najaf were supporting the demonstrators because they found that a political form of religion is leading the country to another civil war. So there was a recognition in Najaf that we need to support the demonstrations if we want to avoid another civil war. At one point, we were very close to a civil war between the militias themselves, but that has been pushed back because of the role of the clergy, which is opposed to the political religious movements.
In Lebanon,
Perla.
In Lebanon, you have the Christian Muslim. I'm going to speak broadly about it. We have been raised in fear. We've always thought that George is going to eat Muhammad and Muhammad's going to eat George. And between every street in Lebanon, you find these differences. And even though today they tell you, no, we're not sectored, we are sectored in every street, through every region. And they used gods to put fear in us, and this is such a shame. Today, it was for the first time through this revolution that people have been saying no. Like, no, we literally were all sorts of religion, Durzi, Shia, Sunni, Christian. We were all on the street and we were saying sectarianism, like seriously. And they have the confessionalism system that has been growing for years, where they actually take hold of ministries, and this one takes this land, and this one construct here. They're taking off all archaeological places just to create political parties' bases, and it's unacceptable today. And this fear that has put through religion is unacceptable. We can let people. You walk through the street, you see always there's the mosque and there's the church. You always have to remember that you are two. You know, you are two, and at the same time. People can pray in mosques and church. You can pray as long as you want, as much as you want. But praying today has nothing to do with politics, with the clean political system where there are rights of citizens being provided. We are done with this. Like when this system was formed, the Lebanese system, every religion was so afraid of their existence. So they told them, come, we'll give you a part. Come, we'll give you a part. These people, today my grandmother tells me, don't get close to the president. He's Christian. I'm like, grandmother, but he's not doing his job. I don't care if he's Christian. I don't care if a Muslim come as president, but he's doing something good. You know, so this is, we really need to separate these two because it's killing us.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that in Sudan, after 30 years of political Islam, this is the end of political Islam? Or Islam is still in politics in the Sudanese
للأسف حتى في ال30 عام
Unfortunately, even during the past 30 years, it should have been Islamic. It was not Islamic. They used the religion to move forward with the agenda. I think that Islam honored the human being. And
yeah. Would you say that this new generation of young people who are in the streets, they are less religious, maybe, or they don't want religion in politics, at least, let's say that. They are not less religious, but do they are as well asking to manage their own personal life according to their will? I speak about their gender choice, about who they love, who they meet, how they speak and how they express, and this is part of a global world movement. Grace, maybe.
Yeah, one of the things that's very important in the Iraqi demonstrations, the amount of girls and women in the demonstration. When I say women, I don't mean women in their 30s and 40s. No, young people in their 20s and teenagers, students. They leave their high schools. There's so many videos of schoolgirls standing up to the principals when they try to tell them, don't go to the demonstration. No, we go to the demonstration. This is a new generation. This is a generation that has seen civil war. For example, in Iraq, many of the kids in the streets have not seen Saddam Hussein. They don't know what Saddam Hussein is. They know that there is a corrupt political elite that's been looting the country, and this political elite has militias and weapons and using religion. For example, in 2013, 12-13, there were demonstrations in Sunni cities in Iraq. Yes. The government at that time used the propaganda that this is Qaeda, Ba'athis, Saddamis, whatnot, and a lot of, let's say, the Shia general opinion was supporting the government in oppressing these demonstrations, which led to the ISIS taking over the Sunni cities. Now, today, I hear so many people telling me, oh, now we understand why the Sunni cities were having these demonstrations. Now we understand. Because once you break this, as Perla was saying, once you break that cycle of making you scared of the other, of keep fearing the Omar and Ali, the Muhammad and George, the Janjaweed and the South Sudanese, once you break that cycle of fear, then everyone stands up and realizes, oh, we've all been looted by the same corrupt ruling elite. And that is very, very important thing. So yes, there's a new generation, a generation that not necessarily secular or atheist, but a generation does not want political religion ruling the country.
And if we go out of religion, but we speak about the LGBT rights, for example, are they in front of this Lebanese revolution?
They took part of it, of course. It's a revolution that's raising a voice for freedom of expression, for freedom of being, for freedom of respecting the body, for freedom of respecting your presence as a human in this world, on this land, in this nation, paying taxes and getting your rights and getting what you need out of it. LGBTQ community in Lebanon has faced also a lot of discrimination, a lot of harassment, even women in Lebanon until few years where we stopped the honor crime. So it wasn't 10 years ago where we stopped it, actually. It was in 2015 that we actually were capable of introducing a law that if a woman is being violated within her man, she can actually call someone and get support. So everything is coming together, but things take time. Just like the corruption took time. And I think we're really far to talk about LGBTQ rights at this point in Lebanon. We still can barely have electricity and water and a working system. But I believe that your freedom, you are born with your freedom. As I said before, once we are born naked, and then suddenly layers within society comes within us, and we have to deal with it. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes you find your freedom within you. But once you get and see these people on the streets standing within the diversity and the solidarity, you feel so strong, you feel so capable, you feel like everything is possible. And this is what's killing them today.
Ala, when did this generation got his ideas and its ideas? I mean, where from? I mean, after 30 years of oppression, dictatorship, broken censorship, broken no culture, broken university and schools, how did those people learn about freedom by themselves?
للأسف إنه الدين
Unfortunately,
أنا جبال عايزة أرد على السؤال.
I want to answer your question, but there is something I need to say first, and then I'll come back to your question.
للأسف إنه
Unfortunately, the former regime that managed or ruled the country for 30 years and called itself Islam was not implementing Islam in the Sudan. We don't have any problem with Islam. It's a religion that has honored humankind. But the problem is that the regime was wearing the clothes of the clergy to to move forward with its own agenda. Islam didn't say kill, didn't say rape, didn't say burn, didn't say wage wars, didn't say to do any of these. But they used religion so that they commit all their actions. Even the religious people, unfortunately, in Sudan, most of them were affiliated to the former regime, where they
بيفصلوا على حسب الفعل اللي عايز تعمله الحكومة بيحللوا بيحرموا.
They were considering licit or illicit whatever they wanted according to their own the requirements of the regime or what the regime wanted to exercise, what crime the regime wanted to exercise against humanity. So the problem is not in Islam, the problem is in using Islam to carry out other things. And this is a defamation of Islam. The terrorists used Islam to make people believe that Islam is.
I want to add that God doesn't have a political party. You asked about that before. God does not have a political party. This is where we can start by talking about Hezbollah. God does not have a political party. God is for everybody. He doesn't hold weapons. God doesn't hold weapons.
What about this new generation? Where for example, in Iraq, they didn't know Saddam. Some of them are talking about Qasem, the General Qasem, who is quite an old nationalist of the 50s. How this generation got the idea about citizenship in a broken country, almost occupied by the Americans, occupied by Iran as well, by foreign forces. How did you have this surge of citizenship spirit?
For exactly these reasons, because the country was occupied by the Americans and by the Iranians. So both of them behaving like with the arrogance of an occupying power. It creates this reaction of what's wrong with us? I mean, why we are being ruled? Why we are being ruled by so many bad people at the same time? And nothing that's been said in these demonstrations, by the way, is a new thing. I mean, every Iraqi will sit with you and look at the sewage, with the electricity. There was nothing new. But then My generation, a generation that's seen the Civil War, is very cautious to go back into the street because they don't want another round of ISIS. And this is why people in their 30s and 40s and 50s didn't go to the streets first. It was the young generation, the 20s and lower, through social media, through reading, through poetry, through losing belief in the system that's been marketed, which is a religious system. But I mean, the amount of people who've been, atheist writing in Iraq, it's massive. So those people who started evolving ideas about religion and public space, about man and woman, about citizenship, and about services. And then something very important also, which is crucial for this demonstration, and this is what the leaders of these demonstrations tell me. On the 1st of October, when the people went into the streets, had the government not used violence, the protest would have died on the 3rd of October. The fact that 157 people were killed on the first day, that created so much anger and so much resistance, and so many more people went into the streets. So to answer your question, yes, it's a new generation. It's a generation open through social media, or through exposed to all these ideas, people traveling, people coming, many writers in Iraq now, many novelists in Iraq. So that created the new sense of identity. But also the violence of the state created the reaction that led to the...
Mm-hmm.
The harder they come, the more resistance you will find.
Reis, you mentioned Chile as a country where you had big demonstrations from a young generation. It was not exactly for the same reasons, but it was because of the excesses of a very wild capitalistic system, which makes you pay for everything, from health to studies to electricity, water, for almost everything. It's one of the most we would call that ultra-liberal or neoliberal system in South America, and it's a failure because the country is rich but people feel poor. Do you feel that this is the same kind of fight that you are fighting as well in your own countries, Perla?
We think that we are poor, but we are bankrupt, kind of. Like we're not poor. Everything has been stolen because we've received a lot of help from the international countries. We have a lot of resources. We have water, we have mountains, we have the sea. Everything is polluted today. Everything has been shoved down to the ground. Like even we have valleys of things that you can use to actually increase your economy. We are a touristic country, yet we cannot make a use of any of this. Why? Because there's something off about the Middle East, I feel, as a whole. Like, why can't we be open to each other? Why they're discriminating every Middle Eastern country in a way for them to fail? There's, I don't know what's happening.
Do you think it's only in the Middle East?
Mostly.
I would agree with what you said. I mean, when you're talking about Chile, you could have been talking about Iraq. It's a very the social injustice. I think if there is one common line that goes from Beirut to Santiago, passing through Baghdad and Khartoum, it will be the social injustice. The social injustice of a young generation that only wants to be treated with decency, with citizenship, with, to go to school, to come back. I mean, I heard Perla earlier saying, I'm so angry. And I was like, why is she angry in Geneva? Because she's angry because everything works so well in Geneva. And I'm angry too, because that sense of this perfection that you have here. One thing, why do you think there are millions of young people from Africa, from the Middle East, who migrate to Europe? No one wants to leave their country, but it's the sense that we need to be treated as human beings what drives people to cross waters, mountains, and borders. This is it. Provide this decency, provide this citizenship in our countries, and no one will be crossing the seas.
هي كل البلدان العربية
All
البلدان
the Arab and African countries and the countries in the Middle East and in Sudan are very rich in resources, but there's no will and there's no management and there's no use of resources to provide the necessities. And our problem is that we were paying for health, paying for education, for other services. One of the main claims is some people died in hospitals because they didn't have oxygen in hospital to save their lives. Crises at schools and education, and these are the basic human rights, and our countries are very rich, but there is no use, proper use of these resources.
We are 4 million in Lebanon, Lebanese. You have 12 up to 18 million Lebanese who went abroad and who left the country. This proves how much we have failed in creating a safe home for these people. When I'm here now, and I feel like everyone has a certain peace of mind to a point that they can give back. In Lebanon, everybody's living with anxiety. Everybody's having panic attacks. Everybody's not understanding why they don't have this peace of mind. But when you have 2 bills of electricity, 2 bills of water, high tuitions, nothing within social justice, you cannot live in peace. You cannot get to your ultimate capacities. You cannot give back to your society. So everyone today needs to have a peace of mind to be capable of giving back to the world. And this is what's not being provided today.
So the Middle East is sharing the same kind of trouble that we have elsewhere, but in a much bigger proportion. We didn't have time to enter into other issues like women, like climate change, but I think they were treated during this festival, and maybe next year or next time we can talk about them. It seems that on the women issue as well, on climate change issues as well, Middle East is moving, but it's as well sharing a very big burden, and it has a lot to achieve. And we hope that today this exchange was quite fruitful. Thank you very much indeed for having been there. Thank you for watching, and good night.
Thank you.